Israel faces critical decisions on multiple fronts. In Syria, the IDF is targeting al-Julani forces who've been on a sadistic rampage against the Druze community. In Gaza, Israel is evacuating civilians in areas slated for intensified operations against Hamas, even as sensitive ceasefire and hostage release negotiations continue behind closed doors in Qatar. All this in the wake of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's recent visit to the White House, and with a coalition crisis that threatens to topple his government. Could elections be looming at the worst possible time? We've got it all covered on today's Israel Undiplomatic.
Welcome to another episode of Israel Undiplomatic. I'm here with my co-host Ruthie Blum, and today we have a whole series of issues to talk about. What would you like to start with, Ruthie?
Well, Mark, I gotta say, I think we have no choice but to talk about Syria, okay? Because over the last 2 days, the new regime in Syria, headed by al-Julani, who really changed his name to al-Shara, and that's when he put on a suit and a tie to try to hide the fact that what he is, and always has been, is a terrorist. He was an ISIS and al-Qaeda operative, various alternating between ISIS and al-Qaeda. It's really charming. And it's very important to note that his troops have been joining Bedouin tribes in Syria and viciously attacking and executing Druze. And Israel cannot put up with that. So Israel gave him a warning, and started attacking from the air, started attacking Julani tanks and things like that. And then, according to Axios, our friend Barak Ravid, who is usually unreliable, but never mind, according to Barak Ravid, the Trump administration told Israel to cool it because the Trump was really on the path to believing that that Syria could join the Abraham Accords and it'll all be lovely normalization. Now, we don't know because, yes, Israel apparently ceased fire for a little while, but resumed. And our defense minister, Israel Katz, openly said, listen, you better watch it. And we have another minister, Amichai Shikli, who really thinks we should assassinate al-Julani. Now, I wouldn't go that far at this point because I think there are many other people that we should be targeting before al-Julani, but one thing is clear. The Druze are great friends of Israel's, and so Israel has to protect them and swore it would. Aside from that, this area near Israel's border or close enough to it that the al-Julani forces pose a threat, Israel can't allow that to happen. So we'll see. This is another front in the war.
What is interesting is what the events of this last week, and especially over the last 2 days, where the Israeli forces have been attacking Syrian government forces, their tanks and so forth, under the command of the Syrian president, of course. It happened just a week ago. We were talking about the chance of maybe some upgrade in the relationship between Israel and Syria. And just before the war in Iran, or the war against Iran, when President Trump was in Saudi Arabia, he met with the new Syrian president, Julani. And he said, I think I'm quoting from memory, but he said he's an attractive, young, strong leader. Yes, attractive, he used the word. And so it's not just Israel. Many people in the West were saying, this guy is interesting, let's give him the benefit of the doubt. And it's true, his behavior over the last few days and the way that he's been attacking the Druze very viciously would seem to think that he's not so attractive. I want to say the following, though. Israel is intervening on behalf of the Druze, not because the Syrian Druze are pro-Israel. The Syrian Jews were an integral part of Assad's coalition. Let's be frank about that. The previous president, and he was no friend of Israel. We are doing it because of the Israeli Druze. The Israeli Druze are loyal Israeli citizens. Their men do their army service. Some of them go to very high roles in the Israeli army. They've been Druze ministers in Israeli cabinets, Druze members of Knesset, and very integrated into Israeli society. And they have come to the Israeli government and said, these are our brothers and sisters in Syria. They're being massacred, come to their protection. So I think this is more about not the Syrian Druze being pro-Israel, but this is showing the Israeli Druze, the Israeli government, showing the Israeli Druze that we care about their feelings, we care about their community. And if they are worried about the massacre of their co-religionists, their fellow Druze in Syria, so Israel will take steps to protect them. I think it's also clever politics from Israel's perspective, because no one knows what's going to happen in Syria. There could be a situation where this fellow stays in power, Giuliani stays in power for I don't know how long. He could have a situation of a permanent crisis in Syria, some sort of situation where there's anarchy and so forth, and then to have like people who are not going to be anti-Israel, if the Druze in Syria feel indebted to Israel, maybe that's a good long-term investment for Israel to make.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right. It is because of the loyal Israeli Druze citizens. But let's face it, the cruelty with which al-Julani's troops were not just killing, not just trying to commit a massacre against the Druze in Syria. They were humiliating them. They were shaving off their beards. They were violently doing it. They were taunting them and laughing. And again, like Hamas, filming their disgusting acts and posting it on social media. They're proud of it. This kind of barbaric behavior is unacceptable to Israel. It isn't just, okay, it's good politics. This is unacceptable. And it's especially unacceptable if you realize that these are people, these meaning this new Syrian regime, sitting very close to the Israeli border. We're talking about the Golan Heights. And that's where al-Julani's name came from. Golan. Now, he claims, okay, he no longer has belligerent aims in relation to Israel, but there's no way you can believe this guy yet, certainly not yet. And his whole thing to the West was, I've come to be a unifying president of Syria. I'm going to bring all the different groups together. Now, that's nonsense. First of all, these aren't just different groups. It's not like, I don't know, in the United States, different immigrant groups. These are different tribes. These are hostile. There are real serious religious conflicts. And the Druze actually are among the peaceful groups because their religion, actually, they're not Muslims. They're Arabs, but they're not Muslims. They're a mixture. Their religion is a mixture of various faiths. Christianity, Zoroastrianism, their whole thing is not like radical Islam at all. Whether or not the Druze in Syria are friends of Israel. That's irrelevant. And in any case, we can't allow that kind of thing. And what is also hypocritical to a millionth degree is how many people right now are claiming that Israel has committed genocide in Gaza or is committing war crimes, which is a lie. We're not committing war crimes. But what al-Julani's guys have been doing the last couple of days comes very close to that. And again, it's the sadism with which they're doing it. This isn't just a conflict where the troops came in to settle tensions or whatever they like to call it. No, and we have to watch carefully, because it's obviously an Al-Qaeda ISIS member. Obviously, you don't just change your spots overnight. It doesn't work that way. And we can see gleefully humiliating and torturing people is not a group that you can have normalization with until you see that they've changed.
So it's clear we live in the Middle East, and the Middle East is full of many bad and violent actors, and he definitely has been one of those. The question here is, because he's under a lot of pressure, but because he is weak and he's fighting to stay in control of his own country, is there, without any illusions, is there an opportunity for Israel, with American help, because he wants the United States to find some sort of modus vivendi with this guy that we haven't had under previous Syrian governments? We have a lot of Israeli forces inside Syria today on their side of the Golan Heights. And I think it would be irresponsible for us not as we should be forceful in defending our interests, but we should also be looking to see this guy is weak. This guy, once again, he needs to consolidate his power in Syria. Is there an opportunity to reach some sort of deal? Once again, a deal that can be verified. You don't need a lot of trust here. There will be no trust. But is it possible to reach some sort of arrangements with this Syrian government that will be good for Israel and stabilize the situation on the Israeli-Syrian frontier? Ultimately, we have an interest in that frontier being quiet.
Well, there's that word again, stabilize. I know. You notice it really is true. Diplomats and people, this use of the word, we need to, it's against stability in the Middle East. I don't know. I'm getting very suspicious of that word because usually when you hear that word, it's like the word peace. Watch out. You better put on a flak jacket as soon as you hear stabilize or peace.
First of all, I didn't say peace. I
No, you didn't say peace. No, you did not. I'm saying that those are the two words.
In the absence of peace,
is it
possible to stabilize?
It is possible to reach. Yes, it is possible to, and that's what we were doing or accepting that it's possible to do, and also because President Trump wants it, and he removed all the terrorist designation for Giuliani. He also is giving him money. All of that's true, okay? But when you say, because he's weak, that's always a bad sign in the Middle East. When you hook yourself up with a weak leader, you're in trouble. The issue isn't whether he's weak or strong right now. The issue is that he is showing his true colors, and in this case, against the Druze, and it's a good litmus test. Very good test for Israel to be watching him and telling him that he'd better watch out because we're not going to allow that. And we're not going to allow it anywhere near our border, especially. So we have two interests here. We have the Druze community, the Israeli Druze community, and we vow, and rightfully so, to help them. They deserve it. They are loyal citizens. And we have a duty to protect our entire northern border, and that includes Lebanon and Syria. And Lebanon is another thing which we'll get to another time. But again, there was talk of maybe Lebanon normalizing relations with Israel, especially since Hezbollah is supposedly hated by the Lebanese government. But let's just get one thing clear. President Aoun said, oh, no, I'm not going to normalize with Israel. And Hezbollah is still prominent in the Lebanese government. So let's not be under any illusions about our northern border. We keep our powder dry.
Let's say something nice about the Syrian president, and you're 100% correct when you say his background is in ISIS and in Al-Qaeda. Yes, he's an Islamist extremist, and people say he's a terrorist in a suit and with a tie. Yes, but
I say that.
You said that. but let's look at his positive side. That the Iranians hate him, Hezbollah hates him, they threaten to kill him. And you know what Stalin said about Churchill? Sorry, what Churchill said about Stalin in the Second World War. Yes, sometimes the enemy of my enemy can become my friend. And that dynamic, in a realpolitik way, I'm just saying this is something that Israel needs to explore and not to dismiss out of hand. We have to be cautious. We don't want to do, don't kiss and ignore the reality, yes? But that is something that needs to be explored. The enemy of my enemy can be, not always, can be my friend. On Lebanon, I think it's clear that there's not going to be a breakthrough with Lebanon in itself. But if there was some deal with Syria, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but if there was to be, I think the Lebanese would automatically go as far in normalizing ties with Israel as Syria, because the Lebanese need not to be more anti-Israel than the Syrians. They're all, they're older brothers, so to speak.
Okay, now it's interesting you brought up Hitler and Stalin, okay, because...
Churchill and Stalin.
No, but you, in reference to Hitler, you were talking about Churchill and Stalin as two enemies of Hitler's. That's why you brought that up. And, it's a problematic analogy. Because you're talking about the Boston Strangler and Jack the Ripper, because Stalin was an evil force. I mean, one could argue he's just as bad as Hitler. So when we're talking about, yes, you sometimes need to make a pact with the devil in order to fight a
Correct.
different devil, but then you're left with that other devil and you have to defeat him. And that is no joke because, as I said, Stalin is one of the most evil figures in history.
So, first of all, I think Churchill made the right decision. And the pact that he had with the Soviet Union was crucial in defeating Nazism in the Second World War. And I was using the metaphor to say I have no illusions about the new Syrian president. Yes, I have no illusions. I don't think that he's some sort of liberal reformer. I know where he comes from. I know what his political being is. I'm just saying, because of his hostility to Iran and Hezbollah, is there room for some sort of understandings, deal to be reached based on no illusions? That's all I'm saying. And I think it should be remembered that though Iran is down, it's not defeated. It wants to rearm Hezbollah. Hezbollah is trying to rearm. We just heard on the news this morning that Israel hit Hezbollah targets in the Bekaa Valley because they were training and rearming and so forth. And so the war against Hezbollah and Iran is maybe it's on a lower flame now, and they've suffered grave defeats, but they are still there. And Giuliani not liking them and them not liking Giuliani is something that makes possibly makes Giuliani an Israeli asset, not because he likes us, but he could fit into an Israeli interest the same way when Trump met the guy, right? And he said he was an attractive young leader. Like, what was he saying? He was saying, maybe this is a guy we can do business with. Maybe this is a guy we can make a deal with of sorts. And I think Israel, once again, we have to be suspicious. We have to be cautious. But we have to see what can be done.
Well, okay, and we always do that. Okay, that's already a given. One of the things that's important to stress here is that the reason I'm always stressing the negative about these deals or these groups is precisely because Israel always gives it a chance, always gives peace a chance, and stability a chance, and deals a chance, and normalization a chance. Always. That's the given. Less given is Israel going at now. Since October 7th, I have to say, Israel woke up and said, we have no choice. We're now fighting, this multi-front war, and it's still going on. And Iran, by the way, there are all kinds of mysterious explosions going on in Iran right now. And you're right about Hezbollah. Israel is said, okay, it's all very well and good, this ceasefire, that ceasefire, but we're not stopping at any moment when we see movement, terrorist movement aimed at us. That's it. No more nice guy. And that brings us to Gaza. So, yes, right now, what we know is there's a delegation in Doha, in Qatar, Israeli delegation. As far as I know, they haven't returned yet. There's a lot of silence about this, but okay, there's a delegation negotiating there. Now, one of the problems is that the Qataris seem not to have so much clout anymore with Hamas, with the Hamas terrorists in Gaza itself, and that the Hamas leadership that's in Qatar, it's not clear how much influence they have on their brethren in Gaza. But okay, never mind that for a second. Trying to reach a deal, Hamas keeps rejecting, etc. And Israel has, what I consider disturbingly, allowed now a whole bunch of humanitarian aid trucks to come in through Egypt, I'm not talking about the American Gaza Humanitarian Foundation distribution, and also is now pouring electricity into Gaza. So this can mean one of two things. Either they know something, the government knows something we don't know, and is doing this to appease Trump or whatever, while pressuring, because we're also stepping up military operations in the Strip, while discussing Trump's plan, Israeli and American plans. The Israeli plan is to set up a humanitarian zone in Rafah, or near Rafah, around Rafah, and in order to separate or sever Hamas from the civilian population. And meanwhile, Trump is working on trying to find new homes for Palestinians who want to leave Gaza, etc. So something is going on there. But one thing we haven't seen yet is Hamas agreed to release any hostages.
You're right on the last point, yes. But let's talk about two things here. Number one, Israel has been making every day important military progress in Gaza. It's done under the headlines in many ways, but our soldiers have taken over more of the Gaza Strip, destroyed more of their infrastructure, eliminated more Hamas commanders, and of course, blown up their underground tunnel network. And that's work that is being done, which is being done, and it's very important. Two, it appears Israel wants a deal with Hamas to get the hostages out. How do we know this? Well, neither of us work for the Israeli government anymore, but we've been hearing leaks that Israel presented a map and then Hamas rejected it. Then Israel suggested another map, and apparently now we've proposed a third map through the interlocutors, and it's showing Israel is showing a desire to be serious about these talks. Israel is showing a desire to be flexible on where we can be flexible. Obviously, there are some issues we can't be flexible on, to where we can be flexible in order to get a deal. And the fact that there hasn't been a deal is that Hamas is playing the spoiler. Now, one day the media says, oh, it's all gone and there's no chance for a deal. And like this morning, we woke up and everyone once again is talking about a deal could be close. No one knows the answer. It's all, it depends what Trump is saying in his last press availability in Washington or something that's being leaked here or something. Today, people are more optimistic. It remains to be seen if there can be a deal. But I think what is clear is that Israel, from its perspective, the prime minister is doing what it can. Once again, we can't do what we can't. What we can't do, but we're doing what we can to facilitate a ceasefire that brings out hostages.
Oh, absolutely, we are, and that might be the problem. We are in this terrible paradox here because it's precisely our flexibility, our willingness to say, okay, you know what? Okay, so we'll go this extra mile. Okay, we'll do this and that. It's precisely that kind of behavior that encourages Hamas to stick to its guns, literally and figuratively. And that's a problem because Netanyahu, rightfully so, he has a public, most of which is desperate to free the hostages almost at all costs. Not at all costs because polls are misleading. Some polls say, most of the public, of course, if you said to them, if we could get all the hostages back all together, dead, alive, and Israel withdraws from Gaza, would you agree to that? And a lot of people, 70% say yes. But if you ask them, what if such a deal involves Hamas staying in power, and they say no. So the polls are completely...
it depends how you ask the question.
Yes, the polls are screwy. But what we do know is that all Israelis are in this paradox, and that has to do with two things. One is that we all want the hostages home, of course. The other has to do with some of the, let's say less than half, but some of the population just hate Netanyahu and whatever he does, right? Then there's the issue of, do you save as many hostages as you can, even though knowing that Hamas will always keep some to keep its leverage? Or do you say all or nothing? And you and I have talked about this before. We believe in saving any life you can in the meantime and, hope to free the rest of them in the best way you can. But then there's a third issue here. And a lot of people don't talk about it because it's very unpleasant to talk about. And that is, we're talking about a numbers game. But when you talk about numbers, when it involves human beings and our family members and our loved ones, it's really distasteful to talk in numbers. But I'm going to do it for a second, just to sort of clarify something. There are 50 hostages left in Gaza. There were 251. There are now 50 left. What we assume to be 20 alive and 30 dead. The amount of soldiers who have been killed in Gaza trying to free them and defeating Hamas and doing everything they're needing to do, and these are all yours and my family members, etc., soldiers and reservists, etc., is well past 800. So the reason we need to discuss that, and it's unpleasant, is that the bereaved soldier, the bereaved families of soldiers killed in battle and killed retrieving or looking for hostages, could argue, look, so far, hundreds of Israeli soldiers have been killed, and there are 50 hostages we don't want killed. And it's a terrible way to discuss this, but it has to be said because all their lives are precious. And of course we want to save the hostages. But the reason the war is dragging on and that has enabled Hamas terrorists to come out in their flip-flops from all kinds of tunnel shafts and suddenly kill soldiers with an RPG or a roadside bomb or whatever, that is because we're being careful not to endanger the hostages. So in order not to endanger the 20 living hostages, we've already killed and we're endangering many more Israeli soldiers. So how do you reconcile those things?
It's difficult. But what we can say is to repeat what the government has said, which is the goals of our operation in Gaza are defeat Hamas, end its rule over Gaza, destroy its military machine, and Gaza should never again be a threat to the people of Israel, and get our hostages back. And you're right, sometimes there's tension between those two things, but they are the goals and they're all important. You can't look at either issue in isolation. First point. Second point that people don't think about is the ultimate Israeli victory will be when all the people of southern Israel can return to their communities, those communities that were destroyed, that were burned, that suffered the terrible massacre on October 7th, 2023, yes? When people can return to those communities and rebuild their communities and feel safe. Can that happen if Hamas is still in power in Gaza? And the answer is no. No one is going to, or very few people are going to return to the border if they think another October 7th is around the corner. And so changing the reality inside Gaza is a crucial Israeli goal, just as is getting the hostages out. One last point. Sometimes the government has put the focus on winning the war in Gaza. Sometimes it's taken a break and said, let's get the hostages out. My understanding of Netanyahu's thinking today is at the moment, and we've seen this of the story about the 3 maps, yes, and he's willing to be flexible. Says at the moment, he's doing everything he can to see is it possible to have a pause in the fighting and get hostages out. Not them all, because that's apparently not possible, but to get everyone who it's possible to get them out. And as it says in the Jewish tradition, if you save one life, it's as if you've saved all of humanity.
No, that's absolutely true. But what I'm talking about is the lives of the soldiers. And why am I mentioning that?
Yeah.
It's their job to defeat Hamas. I'm not complaining about that. That is not the issue. It is their job, and they do it willingly. They believe in the justice of this. What I meant was that because of our extra caution, both about the lives of the hostages, and apparently we know basically which area they're in, and they're being careful about that. And they're Hamas's human shields, just as our Palestinian civilians Hamas's human shields. Our care, taking as much care as we can on this score, has caused the goal of winning the war to be pushed back. And what do I mean by that? We have had to overtake the same areas in Gaza repeatedly. And in the last couple of times, soldiers have been killed. These are places that were cleared out of the terrorists. And then we have a pause, and then they build up again, and the terrorists go back in those areas, and we have to do it again. And you mentioned the southern border. Do you realize that one of the places now that there's serious fighting going on is right near, is like walking distance from the city of Sderot? Walking distance, okay? People don't realize how close this all is. So you talk about not living there. Sderot is not evacuated. People are living there. It's walking distance. And it's not just Israeli troops firing on Hamas. Hamas is firing on Israeli troops right near the border all over again. So that's what I'm talking about. Yes, of course we need the hostages and go to free the hostages. And of course we need to defeat Hamas. But my issue here is that to keep going back and having to take over the same ground again and again and again. And that's why we do need to move the population as far away from the fighting as we can, so we can get this job done, so we can do it, get them fed, get them reorganized while we can focus on killing Hamas. But again, there's still that issue of Hamas hiding behind the hostages. So we are in what I would call an impossible situation that I have to say, thank God Netanyahu is navigating it, because I can't think of another Israeli figure today who would be able to navigate this insanity. And not only that, but with wars on all fronts. Thank God we have Trump in the White House. That is another blessing. But also, while Netanyahu is forced to go to a courthouse every day and sit and give testimony on bogus charges.
And while all this is happening, he's maybe losing his majority in the Knesset, which means he's losing his ability to govern. We had a situation just this week where the ultra-Orthodox parties, one of them at least, and maybe the other one's about to follow tomorrow, which are essential for his governing majority. Well, Knesset has 120 members. You need at least 61 to have a majority, get your legislation through, to have confidence in your government. One is leaving, another one is likely to leave over the issue of the ultra-Orthodox, the Haredim, doing military service. And so not only does Netanyahu have to deal with the geostrategic situation and running the war effectively, and the court case, which you've mentioned just now, but he's also got a political issue here, a serious political issue here. Look, we have to have elections anyway in Israel towards the end of 2026. But is it possible that we're going to have elections before that because he's losing his coalition because of the ultra-Orthodox? Now, let's be frank. Most Israelis in most surveys will say they think the ultra-Orthodox, that the young men should be doing the army like everyone else. I believe that. But this has been a festering political issue for Israelis, not for years, but for decades. And it's never been solved. It's come to a head now because of the war and the demands on the reservists, and reservists doing hundreds of days of duty in Gaza. And the idea in Israel that the burden of military service is not spread out equally. And this is a problem now for Netanyahu. To what extent does he have a stable government with a majority in the Knesset?
No, that is an issue. And as we've said many times, I think to people who don't quite understand this about parliamentary systems in general and Israel's in particular, is that none of these outside pressures can topple the government. It's not the protests in the streets. It's not the anti-Netanyahu protests. It's not the protests before the war, during the war. It's only his own government that can topple the government by one of its members or more pulling out. That's internally it can crash. And what we're seeing is there are a lot of threats about that. And we don't know if it's going to happen. Very soon, the Knesset is going to its summer recess. Or you would call it fall recess. It's not really clear because they're going to reopen for their winter plenum next in 3 months. And apparently none of these parties who are threatening to topple the government are going to actually do it yet. In any case, if you think about it, 3 months from now brings us already to, we're almost at winter. And then even if the government falls, that doesn't mean Netanyahu stops being prime minister. He's prime minister until a new government is elected. And what does that mean? Elections have to be held. And what does that mean? That means an election campaign in the middle of this crucial period, not just during this crucial period. But when things are beginning to move and with all these fronts, we're dealing with all these fronts, to have an election campaign, you know what that's like with stickers and commercials. And anybody who ever goes to an election knows what that's like. It's horrible and annoying, and we can't waste our time on that. And anyone who wishes for that to happen is insane, first of all. And second of all it will do is postpone it won't even really matter time-wise, because the end of 2026 is not so far off. We're soon approaching the end of 2025. With all these months passing, we're going to be close to that time anyway.
I'm not sure it's so crucial, because if you have elections in May 26, or if you have them in October 26, it's not a huge difference.
Exactly.
And so I don't think it's necessarily a game changer.
Oh, no.
And I think-
just one other thing that I forgot to mention
Yes.
about this is that even after there's an election, then there are coalition negotiations.
They take time.
And that also can take. It's insane. We might as well just wait until the scheduled elections in the fall of 2026. But okay,
I'm not sure the politics will allow that to
it
happen.
won't. But I'm saying it won't allow it to happen. But it's insane.
I'm not sure. I wouldn't use the word insane. It's politics, and politics has its own logic, and politics has its own dynamic, yes? If we're going to have elections in 2026 anyway, I don't think it's a huge problem if they're bought earlier by a month or 2 or 3. I would say the following, that if Netanyahu is tougher on the Haredi draft issue, maybe that's good for him in the polls. If most Israelis, and I think most people who vote for Netanyahu, they believe the Haredim should be doing their army service. And if he's seen as capitulating to the Haredim just before an election, now it's true, in the end, there's a lot of emotion in this issue on all sides. In the end, you're not going to have all the Haredim in the army tomorrow, but can you increase the level of their thing? And I just remind you, earlier this week, Netanyahu visited a Haredi unit in the army, and he made a speech there saying, this is a sign that one can be Haredi and do military service at the same time. And I think what he's saying is his goal is to respect the ultra-Orthodox community, to create mechanisms and frameworks within the army for them to do their service. And that's the sort of thing that we should all be supporting.
But we do. This is not an issue of, you make it sound as though, no, most Israelis support that. You support it. I support it. But here's the thing. An agreement had been reached with them already to highly increase the number of Haredim. There were going to be 10,000 serving in the army within 2 years, or enlisting within 2 years, and only those studying Torah full-time would be exempt. It was already in black and white on a contract. But then we attacked Iran on the night between June 13th and 14th, or 13th, yeah. Then the Friday the 13th, early in the morning. And so that was put on hold. And this week, the head of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, Yuli Edelstein, went and he submitted a draft to the Haredim that had completely altered the clauses they had already agreed upon.
That's what the Haredim say.
Yes, that's what they say, and I believe them, because it had come to it, and then Yuli Edelstein made a speech to explain that no, he's not gonna. It'll only be a bluff if we don't have mechanisms to enforce it and to put in jail anybody who doesn't abide by it. His speech was not, "Hey, what are they complaining about?" No, I believe them and not him.
So I think in the Haredi, I want to say this: in the Haredi community, there are many logical people who want to see the Haredim in the army, understand this is inevitable and this is good. But you do have very conservative elements in leadership roles that are unwilling for any compromise for all sorts of reasons. They're afraid that if the young Haredim men go into the army, they'll be exposed to secular culture and they'll stop being Haredim. They've got all these fears. And you've heard some rabbis have said some things which are totally, no one can justify them. And to what extent here is there this dynamic in the Haredi community? And if we want Haredim into the army, it's clear that the secular majority in Israel has to compromise. But the Haredim have to be in the army
But what? But
in
what
greater
makes you
numbers
think-
than before.
No. I'm not talking about the whole communities.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the specific Haredi politicians
Yeah.
who were negotiating with Yuli Edelstein, and he pulled a fast one on them. He changed what they had already agreed to. So I'm sorry, Mark. Here, you and I part ways. You can't do that. First of all, you're right. It's a complicated issue. It's been around since the founding of the state. And we were coming to an agreement over it. It was going to be a gradual thing and an agreement.
In the end,
And
there will be a
he-
compromise.
There will, but why did he pull a fast
So
one?
I'm not convinced. I am not convinced he did. I know that's what the Haredim are saying, but that's what they're doing to justify them leaving the government. One of the Haredi parties already pulled out of the government before what he already.
No, not before. As a result,
No, they're United. And now we get into technicalities.
United-
We're going to lose some of our listeners, but there's United Torah Judaism and there's Degel Torah. And United Torah Judaism already resigned. Sorry, Agudat Yisrael already resigned beforehand. So
but not
there
to
are
topple the No, but that wouldn't have toppled the government. I am
You're-
now talking
You're right.
about the fact, you're right, not everybody agreed to it. The majority of the Haredi politicians agreed to a draft of the proposal, and Yuli Edelstein, when they reconvened, altered the document. And if you don't I actually believe them. I believe them totally. And that is why they threw a fit, and that's so.
We have to finish because we're running out of time. When politicians are negotiating, and it's like, when you're hearing employers and strikers and they both got their opinions and you say, I believe this side, I believe this side, I think there's always often truth on both sides. And with that, I think we're going to have to sign up until next week.
Excellent.
See you then, Ruthie.
Looking forward.